Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us and welcome to today's session on college and university collaborations. I'm your chair for today's session. My name is Smita Jamdar and I'm partner and head of education at Shakespeare Martineau Solicitors. But my involvement in this session, I think, stems from the fact that I was on the Civic University Commission and was also on the expert panel for the College of the Future. So it's a subject very, very close to my heart. I'm delighted to be joined by a really great panel of speakers today. We have Charlotte Brookfield, who is a senior lecturer at Cardiff University. We have Steve Mariadis, who is CEO of the Southwest Institute of Technology. We have David Hiddleston, who is a curriculum portfolio manager at Data-Driven Innovation Skills at Edinburgh College, and Sharon Hutley, who is Deputy Vice Chancellor of Academic Development and Performance at Nottingham Trent University. And we also have Lewis Cooper from the Association of Colleges and the Independent Commission for the College of the Future. So some great perspectives that we're going to hear today. Just in terms of a little bit of housekeeping, today's event is being recorded and a recording of the event will be made available on the Civic University website as soon as possible. The slides will also be made available. There's going to be a Q&A session in the second half of the event. So if you have got a question, please do put it in the Q&A function. There's also a chat function, which would be great if you could all just pop your own names in and let us know who's joining us today, where you're from. That'd be fantastic to hear. But also any other general comments you have on the discussion as it's going on. And at the end of the session, there'll be a really quick feedback poll, which we'd be very grateful if you would complete. What we're here today to explore is really examples of on-the-ground collaboration between colleges and universities. And I thought that before we dove into the case studies themselves, I wanted to give you a very quick overview of the background to the session, thinking briefly about why we believe collaboration matters. Now, back in February of this year, the Civic University Commission and the Independent Commission for the College of the Future produced a report on university and college collaborations across the 4 nations. And if you haven't had a chance to read that, I really would strongly recommend you did, because it's got some fantastic resources in it. And what it did was it outlined the current policy context in each of the 4 nations, and then made recommendations for policymakers and for institutional leaders about how to overcome any systematic, I suppose, challenges to collaboration across the UK's systems. And central to the to the report's recommendations was this idea that there was a shared vision that education has the power to be transformative, whether that's for individuals, for businesses, for places, or for society as a whole. Colleges and universities sit at the heart of their communities, and they share a common purpose, which is to ensure that all people, no matter what their background or their past experience, and no matter where in the UK they live and work, should be able to access high quality and relevant education and skills and the opportunities that those bring. Now, being a lawyer, I've also thought of this from the legal perspective, and I'd actually argue that increasingly there's not only a legal discretion, but a legal imperative to consider collaboration. Universities and colleges share the same charitable purpose, that's the advancement of education, and that includes vocational training, community education, the development of individual competencies and skills, research, and how to communicate new knowledge to whoever needs any of those things. So in the context of the very profound and complex education and skills needs that we have across the UK in the 21st century, how much more easily and productively might both colleges and universities meet those needs if they work together? So that's the question I think we need to ask ourselves. Taking all this into account, you might assume, therefore, that collaboration between colleges and universities happens everywhere and that these collaborations are easy. And yet it doesn't, and it isn't. There is a tension or an uneasy balance sometimes between collaboration and competition at the crux of our tertiary systems, and too often collaboration happens despite the system, not because of it. So both within and between the two sectors, institutions can be pitted against each other, they can be locked in unproductive competition, and that might be as a result of government policy or funding choices, or even institutional cultures and leadership behaviours. Happily for all of us, there are some excellent exceptions where local leadership has definitely driven more collaborative approaches, and that's what we're here to explore today. The report celebrated 19 case studies from across the UK and represented a diversity of collaboration for a wide range of purposes. What we're going to do today is focus on 4 of those partnerships, and colleagues on the panel will talk about them, showing how their colleges and universities work together, how they've formed the collaborations and sustained them, and what they've achieved for their communities. After the 4 case studies, Lewis is going to draw out some themes and some links based on the recommendations of the reports and the lessons that we might all learn from it. And then after that, there will be an opportunity for Q&A and a panel discussion. Now, Charlotte has to leave slightly early. So what I'm going to suggest is if you have any specific questions for her arising out of the case study she's about to describe, I'd ask you to put them in to the Q&A as soon as possible, and we'll make sure Charlotte gets a chance to answer them before she has to leave. So on that note, I will hand over to Charlotte to share with us her case study.
Thank you very much. So Shireen, I've got some slides which I sent to you, so hopefully you're able to share those with me. Perfect, thank you. So hi everyone, I'm Charlotte. I'm a senior lecturer in the School of Social Sciences at Cardiff University. And today I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the partnership work that I've been undertaking with a local FE college called Cardiff and Vale College. Can I have the next slide, please? Yes, so very briefly, I mentioned that I'm based in the School of Social Sciences at Cardiff University, and we're really fortunate within the School of Social Sciences to be home to what we call a Q-STEP centre. So the Q-STEP initiative came about a decade ago now, and is aimed at changing the way in which we train social science students in numeric or quantitative research method skills. And whilst the focus of that funding has quite often been on what we can do with our undergraduate curriculum, there has also been some scope to do outreach work with that funding and think about how we can actually upskill younger people in terms of their research method skills, and also those that are post-university level. And so that's really where we've been able to start to engage with Cardiff and Vale College. Just for your information, Cardiff and Vale College is the largest FE college in Wales and the 3rd largest college in the UK. It's spread out across a number of campuses and has actually even got some campuses based over in China. Next slide, please. So the work that I do with Cardiff and Vale College is part of a bigger package of work that as a Q-STEP centre we do with local schools and colleges. So this slide is just basically flagging that there are other engagement events that we do. So for example, we run Welsh Baccalaureate teacher conferences for those that are delivering that qualification here in Wales. We also link up with our university's widening participation team to support events, as well as working with other stakeholders such as Qualifications Wales and Agored Cymru. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about 2 projects that we've been working on with Cardiff and Vale College over a number of years now. And the first of these is how we've been supporting their learners studying the Extended Project Qualification, or the EPQ. So the EPQ is the equivalent to half an A-level, and students study it alongside their A-levels. It's an opportunity for learners to undertake and plan a piece of independent research that perhaps falls outside of the curriculum, allows them to explore something in a little bit more detail that they're interested in. And what we've been doing over the past 5 years now is supporting students studying this qualification through fortnightly workshops. So myself and a team of PhD researchers here in the School of Social Sciences have created these workshops and made a bank of resources that we then deliver within the college. And obviously, initially these were in-person sessions. In the last few years, they've been online, and I'll touch upon that a little bit more later. Alongside this, then, I've also worked with Agored Cymru, which is a qualifications body here in Wales, and we've developed 2 units in what we call social analytics and applying social analytics at both level 2 and level 3. And so the learners that complete the fortnightly workshops are able to demonstrate that they've also achieved the assessment criteria for these units, and therefore get that additional accreditation at the end of their EPQ. Next slide, please. So just to give you a flavour of the sorts of things we've covered in those fortnightly workshops, we start off with things like the research process, including how to create a Gantt chart, given the emphasis that the EPQ puts on planning research projects. We also get all the students set up with a UK data archive account so that they can download a secondary source of data. And then we teach them how to do some basic data analysis in Microsoft Excel. And we also cover things about evaluating different sources of information. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, students can decide what they want to focus their project on. Perhaps predictably, this year we had a lot on COVID-19 and the lockdowns. So for example, comparing different countries' responses to the pandemic, or comparing the government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic versus previous pandemics, for example. A lot of students decide to do things on the environment and sustainability. But equally, we see that there's quite a lot of students that decide to focus their project on something that links with their future study options or their career choices. Next slide, please. So this is just an example of a project that a student did. This is actually from a few years ago now. So this student explored the question, to what extent are first-year female students suffering more from financial anxiety than first-year male students in university? And so to give you an idea of what this student did is that they actually went away and engaged with some academic literature to see how financial anxiety was operationalized in existing studies. And then they created a survey, which they distributed to students, undertook some statistical analysis, and also did some interviews. So I think that really gives you an idea of the scale and how much work the students have to do for these EPQ projects. Next slide, please. And I've just got a quote here from one of the lecturers at the college talking about these fortnightly workshops. So one of my students commented how they wish every lesson was like this, which just goes to show how much added value they bring to our students' education and to the research programme. At Cardiff and Vale College, we serve the hardest to reach communities in their ambition to progress to university and careers to change their lives, along with the lives of their communities. This programme is part of this ambition. Next slide, please. So just very briefly wanted to touch upon some of the challenges, and I'm going to focus on the computer and software challenge here because I think that's probably more interesting. So when we were delivering these sessions in person, one of the challenges was around timetabling and being able to have computer rooms to teach some of these skills that we wanted to, and perhaps sometimes having to rework the workshops because that resource was not available. And then obviously with the pivot to teaching these sessions online, it was actually not all of the students having access to a laptop that had a webcam, for instance, so not being able to engage in the same way, not being able to troubleshoot any issues that they were having using Excel, for instance. So that became a challenge too. There's also been challenges around costing and administration. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that in the Q&A if people are interested. Next slide, please. So the second project that we've run with Cardiff and Vale College has been actually working with their lecturers and staff. And this has been about allowing those lecturers and staff to undertake a piece of independent research, which has been supported by face-to-face workshops, as well as online tutorials and asynchronous activities. And we're encouraging these delegates to produce different outputs showcasing the research that they've undertaken in their area. Next slide, please. So this table is just a schedule to give you an idea of how this programme has worked. So Tier 1 was our biggest group of delegates. There were 14 of them there. We did some in-person training, and then that was followed up by some online training. And at the end of that, if the delegates wished to, they could submit to us a research proposal, which we would review and give them feedback on. Those that submitted a research proposal then progressed to Tier 2. And in a similar way, then at the end of Tier 2, if the delegates chose to present about what their research project was going to be on, they progressed to Tier 3, which is actually taking place tomorrow, the live face-to-face sessions. Next slide, please. So just to give you an idea of the sorts of things we've covered in those face-to-face workshops, the first one was very much about researching in an educational field and what is possible and the different methods they may choose to use. Next slide, please. Whereas the second session, so for Tier 2, we very much focused on the delegates and enabling them to actually undertake their own research. And then Tier 3 on the next slide, please. which, as I said, is happening tomorrow, is all about visualizing and being able to communicate findings from their research to share beyond their own classroom and to share with other practitioners within the college, and actually even in some instances possibly further afield as well. Next slide, please. So to give you an idea of the sorts of projects that have progressed all the way through to that last tier 3, I've just put a couple of research questions on the slide. So we've got one delegate, for instance, who's exploring, do Cardiff and Vale College A-level students use feedback efficiently to enhance their independent learning skills? And then the second one, how do learners with complex, profound and multiple learning difficulties access post-16 local education provision in Cardiff? Next slide, please. Conscious of the time. So yeah, just a very brief bit of evaluation. So the delegates you can see here have said that the workshops have allowed them to help break down bits of information in their head, enabled them to do action research in a way they haven't before, and to focus on how different methodologies can be applied to their area of interest. Next slide, please. And very briefly then, the challenges. So as you will have seen, from tier 1 to 3, we have seen some attrition. We never anticipated that everybody would progress all the way through. That was not an expectation. However, it would have been nice to have had a few more projects making it all the way through to that final tier. Some of our understanding or theory behind why this may be the case for this attrition has been challenges over room bookings again and timetabling, because obviously a lot of these members of staff, not all of them are teaching members of staff, but quite a lot of them are, as are myself and my colleague who are delivering the workshops. So it's very hard to coordinate when to run these sessions. And also we noticed that there were quite large discrepancies in pre-existing knowledge, with some people having some research background and others not. So perhaps the future sessions we'd need to think about that when we were setting up these workshops as well. And then I think it's my last slide. Yeah, so just to say thank you very much for the invitation to present today. And if anybody does have any questions, then by all means pop them in the Q&A. But also, as I'm not around later, do feel free to contact me via the email address on the slide. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. That was really interesting. And I think what I loved about it was it shows just the diversity of collaboration that can take place, because it's quite different to the others that we're going to hear about. And you do have a question, which I'm going to put to you, because obviously you may not be around later. And the question is, what was the driver for the project and how did it first come about sort of to be established?
So with the Q-Step funding, there's always been a driver to do outreach work, and we try to do lots of little things. And I think Cardiff and Vale College were the first one where we kind of offered something and they really took the bait. And they said, you know, we want more of this. What else can you offer? And they've just been very proactive in seeing ways in which we can support their learners, and also very willing for us and receptive to trying things out. So that's really how it's happened. I think it was initially one of their college lecturers coming along to one of the events that we had open to all teachers, but kind of saying, I want more, what else can you do? And so that's really how that relationship has developed.
Oh, so again, really interesting. There's a slight funding stimulus, but then it's down to sort of individual enthusiasm to take it forward. And then obviously the proof is is there, and you can reinforce to other people that it works.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
and certainly with that, the Q-Step funding is now no longer a thing, but actually the college have continued to invest in it because that foundation's been laid now, and they can see the value that it brings to their learners and their staff. So yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Charlotte.
Thank you.
I'm going to try and keep on time and move to Steve, who's going to talk to us about an IoT in the Southwest.
Thanks, Amita. I'm a little bit worried that I'm going to regurgitate a number of the things that came out of the report that Lizzie shared a moment ago. But we're going to put this into a real life context, because we, as an Institute of Technology, whilst we're only 3 years old now, we have been working in the collaboration for best part of 18 months prior to that to get the bid together to form an Institute of Technology. So just a little bit of background about what Institutes of Technology are, because we really are in the, whether you see it as a fertile area of growth for working together, or whether you see it as a battleground, depends on kind of the history between your FE and HE partners in a particular region. But our job is to bring together higher level technical education. So that's level 4 and above, and that could be part-time, full-time, or apprenticeship based. So the government direction was to say we want to do technical education differently. We want FE and HE to work well together because we know they can do various bits of this in a world-class way. But we also want employers to be involved. So we want you to partner with the key employers in your region and not just work with them, maybe work for them, depends how the relationship is. But we've seen that being a real eye-opener in a positive kind of way. So our scope is not only just to look at digital engineering manufacturing qualifications. We've increased in scope since our opening to start looking at health sciences, construction, and other areas as well. So anything that reflects on a technical education and how that all forms together is part of our remit. If we could jump on to the next slide, please. So with regards to how many of us there are, we are pretty much the oldest IoT in that we were signed off and licensed in mid 2019. But since then, we've had another 11 Wave 1 IoTs, as we describe them, people that bid at the same time as we did during 2018. But recently, over the last 6 months, we heard of 9 new IoTs being awarded, the Wave 2 IoTs. So that there is an IoT in almost every region of the UK. And the great thing about having 21 regional IoTs is the numbers behind that. So in there, we have over 100 FE colleges represented. We have over 40 universities represented and well over 150 major employers represented as part of the collaboration. And before I give you details on our Southwest collaboration specifically, it's worth stressing that we work together as a network. So we come together quite frequently and we discuss about how things are working in different regions and where we can share experience, where we can learn from each other. And that part of the process, that collaboration is working really well as well. But if we dive down to the Southwest and what we look like, if we could have the next slide, please. We cover Devon, Cornwall and Somerset. And as part of that, we have 5 FE colleges in the region. So Petrock up in North Devon, Bridgewater and Taunton. So if we could skip back one slide. Yeah, that's the one. We have Exeter College, City College Plymouth, and Truro Penwith College. Now our region, unsurprisingly, apart from being fantastic at this time of the year, is quite rural. There's quite a lot of space, quite a lot of time to work and time to learn. The travel times are quite large. So we have a good geographic coverage as part of our partnership. We have 2 major universities in the region as part of our collaboration as well, the University of Plymouth and the University of Exeter. And the icing on the cake is the employers that we have. So we work closely with the Met Office, Oxygen House, a group of data science companies in Exeter. We have Babcock in the form of the work they do in the naval dockyards in Plymouth. And we have TDK up in North Devon, an electrical engineering company. So that is our collaboration. And our story, to be honest, in 2018, 2019, when we were looking at this bid, it was very much okay, we'll come together to show a collaboration. We'll see what we can say we can do together, but we're still very, we want to hold on to what we've got. There's some commercial things that we're doing we don't necessarily want to share. But what we've seen over the last 2, 3, 4 years since that time has been truly fantastic. We've seen sharing of learners, we've seen sharing of courses, we've seen sharing of staff amongst partners, and sort of building, and one of the key things that also comes out of the report is building upon that concept of specialisms. So in the Southwest, we see that some of our unique specialisms that we can offer the UK come in the form of what our geography offers and what our major employers offer as well. So we could jump on to the next slide, please. So when we were initiated, we said we're going to do marine, So University of Plymouth, City College Plymouth, and the Plymouth area are world class at marine engineering. We also are going to specialise in data and data science and AI. I mean, it's inarguable that the Met Office is world class at data science. And as part of that, we've seen a real growth in the local area around Exeter in data skills. But we also have this probably not well known, not enough, the largest construction project in Europe on the Somerset coast up in Hinckley, where we have also the National College for Nuclear, and we work very closely with EDF. So the types of jobs, the types of courses, the types of learners that you see in those various parts of the region have not only helped strengthen what's going on in that particular place, but we've had conversations where, okay, there's a welding course in Plymouth. Well, that's great, I'll go work on ships. But did you know that we need a lot of welders working on the nuclear reactors up in Somerset? So the sharing of skills, not only the equipment, the spaces to do these and deliver these courses, but the sharing of skills and having key staff, move between different points, all of that collaboration has really been borne out because Plymouth doesn't see nuclear skills as something that is part of their commercial catchment. So they're more than happy to share on those things, and vice versa. Somerset doesn't see marine engineering as one of their specialisms. So seeing that flow has been really refreshing. And what we've taken from that is we've moved on. We're pushing for Cornwall, the spaceport in Cornwall, to be world-class in space skills and curriculum. So we have Truro and Penwith College working closely with the University of Exeter in that. And we've also recently, in the first quarter of this year, designed and delivered renewable energy courses through heat pumps, through wind farms, working closely with large employers like Centrica. And again, as part of that, as a specialism in that particular area, we've seen none of the commercial arguments about, well, we'll do this, you leave us to it. There's more than enough to go around. The capacity in some ways becomes the constraint for that. So all in all, what we've seen on that's a whistle-stop 8 or 9 minute journey through our 4 years, we've come from a point where people were nervous about collaboration. The colleges were nervous about their level 4, level 5 and some of their university degree course levels. The universities were nervous about what this would mean to their degree courses. But what we've seen over the last 4 years is that growth in understanding. Firstly, really amongst the management of the organisations, but then when it starts to come to the specialists in their curriculum and their area, they've been more than happy to share. And that there's enough to go around for everybody is a phrase that I hear quite frequently. So as I say, that's a whistle-stop tour. I'm obviously more than happy to take questions and answers later on in the session.
Thank you very much. That was really fascinating, and I think you used the expression "there's more than enough to go around" a couple of times. But what I was also sort of seeing there was how collaboration can make there more to go around for everyone if you work together. So it's not just about slicing up the cake; it's about making the cake bigger.
Absolutely, I had to try very hard not to use the sum of the parts cliche.
I know, but it was there. We could all feel it. So thank you very much. We'll take questions on all the presentations towards the end. So I'll ask David now if he could talk us through your case study, please, David.
Yeah, thanks for that. So hello everyone. So my name is David Hilston, and I'm on a secondment at the moment with Data Skills Gateway, which is part of the Edinburgh South East Scotland City Regional Deal. Across the next sort of 9-10 minutes, I'm going to be presenting information about the Data Skills Gateway programme. And, the Data Skills Gateway programme is funded by the Scottish Government to meet their priorities of reducing skills shortages and inclusive growth. So the programme aims to develop an approach to increasing the data skills of the population of the city region, regardless of background, gender, or location. So to do that, we need organisations to be working together. So we need to be working in partnership. So this activity together brings together industry, universities, college, schools, and other partners to help deliver an integrated pipeline of skills development and progression routes into data careers. So colleges and university are at the centre of that, but so are other organisations. So if I think about my own learning, I done an apprenticeship, so I didn't find university until later in life, but I gained a lot of skills through an apprenticeship, and I seen college as a second chance to learning and education, and then progress on to a university. So this project is very much universities and colleges working together with other organisations. There's 4 strands to the Data Skills Gateway. So there's data education in schools. So they're working across the region. Now the region is Borders, Edinburgh, Fife and West Lothian. So data education in schools are working with the schools. Data education in colleges are working again with 4 colleges. It'll be Borders, Edinburgh, Fife and West Lothian. I actually lead on that strand, though we all work together, but I lead on that strand. That's my specialism. Data education in universities, there is 4 universities involved with this project. Edinburgh, Edinburgh Napier, but not forget about Edinburgh Napier, Heriot Watt and Queen Margaret University. So that's the first 3 strands, but we also have a strand for data skills for work. So, you know, this session is focusing on colleges and universities working together, but there is that exit to work as well. And, you know, with this project, you've got to look at the whole project and not just a small part of it, because everybody actually are helping each other. And that's what I love about this. The programme is being delivered in 3 key areas. So there's professional learning, course development, and course delivery. So it's delivered, professional learning is delivered by industry, university and college lecturers, and the purpose of this is to upskill educators to deliver data science. Now, throughout the next sort of 5-6 minutes, I'll probably be referring to data science and data skills. Think about that as the same. Okay, so that was so key for this project that we upskilled lecturers to be able to deliver this programme. Without that, then I don't know how we'd actually be able to deliver what we have in the last couple of years. The feedback from lecturers, this was an opportunity rather than something as an add-on. And I keep going back to the last 2 years because the experience that we've all gone through with the pandemic. So the professional learning was actually online. So before that, we were thinking about in-person delivery for professional learning. So we would have delivered that, but I think we've delivered more professional learning through the online means. And we weren't really thinking about that before. It was going to be in-person workshops. That was a real bonus. So after professional learning, we also fund course development. So we want to deliver from level 3 right up to level 12. That actually covers from schools, colleges and university. And we're not just hopefully producing data scientists at the end of this, we're actually also wanting to embed data right across the vocational areas. So the first 2 presentations, which is quite interesting, they both mention data. So it's there, it's right across there. It's a core skill, it's a key skill now. I know in England we talk about functional skills. For me, data skills is a functional skill. So the development, the funding's been spent on contextualizing the data learning activities. So if I take an area like health and social care, then, and let's say it was an HND in health and social care, a learner would expect to come along to the course and their course is all about health and social care. So things like data sets and the learning activities would be contextualized. So they'll be doing data, but it'll be relevant to health and social care. Then I could talk about construction or sport, it'd be the same. So that's taken quite a bit of time to develop. And once we've got that, we're now delivering a program. And we're delivering that program from level 3 right up to level 12. What's been developed out of that is articulation agreements. Now, in Scotland, we've been very good with articulation agreements for many years. What we've done is we've actually focused on a data science one, and that's something that's going to grow from the project in the next couple of years. There's going to be more students from college achieving level 7, level 8, and entering at level 9 at university. So there's been a lot closer partnerships. Before I was in this post involved with this project, articulation agreements were so useful. However, it was a bolt onto my job. My experience is we've actually had funding and opportunity to develop articulation links. So our remit is growing local data talent and open the data opportunity to all. So a learner that's entering level 3 might end up level 12. So, and that's why I said that it's important that we don't just focus on college and universities. It's important that we actually focus on schools as well, so the journey can start right at the beginning. So that's our remit, is growing local data talent. People are going to go into data science industry, but also masses and masses of people that are going to be data workers, so working with data. And recently we had a learner who was working administration in their post, and they upskilled. They're now working with data. They're not a data scientist, but they're using data more effectively. So it's all about inclusion first. It's a truly joined up approach, and we want a region that's ready for the future. Well, actually, for me, ready now. So it's all about giving everyone in the city region a chance to gain data skills. If I was just to go back to the levels and maybe talk about schools, colleges and universities, where schools traditionally deliver from level 3 to level 6, and they still do. Colleges deliver from level 4 to level 8. So if you think about, there's a partnership. So each college, Borders, whether it's Borders or West Lothian, that we can deliver a school-college partnership. And the school-college partnership could be a National Progression Award in data science. And the young person who would be in their senior phase from the age of 15, 17 would actually undertake a college program as part of their school program at level 5 and 6. That might actually be some of the skills they require to progress to a higher education course at college or the university. And then we take the overlap with colleges and university. So more and more HND 7, level 7 and 8 is delivered at the colleges, but it's year 1 and year 2 of a degree program. So we have something called associate degree program as part of this project. And learners from each of the colleges have progressed successfully to Heriot-Watt University through this funded. So they've done 7 and 8. There is a couple of more units to do if they want to articulate, but it's all funded. And something I haven't mentioned as I've been going through this presentation, that all our courses for the data science are free. Not funding for learners, but the actual courses are free. So how many people have we reached? Now, I'm talking about the college sector here. So over a 2-year period, we've actually reached 2,200 learners. Now, that's on a data science course. So that's a standalone data science course. That's not including, for example, we have a unit called Core Skills ICT, which is equivalent to the functional skills in England, that we also deliver data in there. So that's the true embedded, but that's standalone. So what have the challenges been, or challenge? And I've taken one: staff capacity. So staff have been across all the project are fully timetabled, and when we actually want to put a new provision, possibly at a certain part of the region, it's been quite difficult. However, we are in discussion. We've got a possible solution to that, and this is what will increase more working together, where we're going to second and put a recruitment out where there'll be an individual who will work over the 4 colleges. And the step up is actually delivering 1 award over the 4 colleges that could articulate to university. Now, that's just at the discussion stage, and I wanted to put that out there because that's I want to drive to that, because that would be a true partnership. The benefits I've mentioned already: professional learning. It's been great feedback. The educators have really developed their skills, a lot of transferable skills. It's been great working in partnership with industry and the university. They've delivered some of the training. We've got to know more people. We're sharing resources. And the one I quite like, the curriculum review has happened quite naturally, because in the vocational units, they've been adding a data skills unit, which has improved their framework. And the last one is the articulation agreements are very good in Scotland. What we're doing is building on that and improving, and that is one of the key areas that we're working on. I'm going to stop there. Hopefully I haven't overrun. Okay.
Thank you, David. I mean, I think that, again, I was really struck there about the references to inclusion, because I think collaboration, a bit like, I can't remember which of the lagers it is, it allows us to reach the parts that other forms of activity can't. And I think that's what so really comes out strongly in that case study. Capacity to be really inclusive about it. Sharon, then, our final case study, please.
Okay, thanks, Smita. I think it was Heineken was the word you were looking for.
Heineken. I couldn't remember which one it was. I didn't want to attribute it to the wrong one.
Great, thanks. And yeah, great. We've got the slides up there as well. And thanks for the opportunity to just tell you a bit about the relationship and the partnership between Nottingham Trent University and Vision West Nottinghamshire College this afternoon. Happy to take any questions later, but a quick canter through then what this relationship is about, how it came about, some of the successes and some of the sort of challenges that we faced. So next slide, please. And this relationship between the university and the college was born out of the establishment of a programme of work in 2 districts of Nottinghamshire. So if you look at the map on your right there, I'm talking about the Mansfield and Ashfield districts in the northwest of the county. Why are we doing this? Well, Nottingham Trent was and is a very successful city centre-based university with both a wide national and international appeal, and yet only 15 miles up the road, these 2 districts have very low levels of higher education participation and very low levels of socioeconomic indicators. And I think, in short, Nottingham Trent felt that we really should be contributing more in the local region. And so we wanted to sort of set about finding out what could we do, what would be beneficial, and how could we go about that. So we've got campuses in the city and in the northeast of the region, but the northwest was new territory for us, and that's what brought us into contact with Vision West Notts College in the first place. And for those of you who've been watching Sherwood last night and next episode tonight, you'll know roughly where I'm talking about. Mansfield and Ashfield are former mining and manufacturing areas. And Vision West Notts College is based in Mansfield and has several campus sites around the town there. It's a relatively large college with about 14,000 students. About 4,000 of those are on apprentices. So next slide, please. So Our conversations really began probably about 4 years ago now. They were led, though, actively by the district councils, and really with the intention of looking at, well, what could we do together and how could we go about that? And we've really ended up with a programme of work that I think has the ambition to make a leading contribution to levelling up and regeneration in the area. But I think that was also articulated particularly by Mansfield as having an aspiration to become a successful, integrated and vibrant university town by having the presence of a university there. And I'll say a bit more about that, what that presence actually looks like in just a moment. But how are we going to go about meeting that ambition? Well, through co-development and co-delivery of that programme with a wide range of stakeholders, seeing how we could achieve sustainable change with respect to economic situations, social, cultural, health, and so on. So not just focused on education, but seeing education as a really core part of that, and therefore really thinking about the routes into and through non-compulsory and tertiary education. And a really important part of that, particularly with this idea of becoming a university town, achieving trust with local stakeholders and attracting new audiences to engage with what a university can and can't contribute to an area. I think we're on next slide, please. So I think rather than just focus on the higher education bit, just broadly, the programme of work covers 5 key areas underpinned by an active research and evaluation strand as well. So it's education across the spectrum, so from preschool right through to post-compulsory, community participation, prosperity and culture, including funding from the Arts and Humanities Research Council to get some of that work underway. It's been great. But higher education really has been, I think, at the epicenter of this to really help us get things moving, but to try and create that whole ecosystem that kind of intersects between those different strands of work. And in undertaking that, as I say, it's been really key to work with lots of different stakeholders. So it's been interesting to hear from the previous presenters, the kind of stakeholders that you're engaging with. And I think we could say, yes, all of the above with respect to this programme as well. The HE work stream, as I say, is conducted in conjunction with the college, and I think importantly facilitated greatly by having a physical presence on the college main site. So we have a higher education hub, which sort of looks and feels like a sort of mini university, but actually on the site of the college. And we opened that provision there in September 2020. And if you need your COVID reference point, that was sort of about 6 months into COVID. So challenging times to open, but we did it nevertheless. And I'm really glad that we did. Next slide, please. So this slide just sort of summarises what the higher education provision actually looks like, the subject areas, how it's structured and so on. And it was great to really be able to start almost with a blank sheet, not completely, but almost with a blank sheet to think, well, okay, what could we do here? What's the best format for that? And so engaging with a lot of different stakeholders to try and design the portfolio and the curriculum structure to best meet local needs. So this is very much aimed at the local and regional population, but also designed to hopefully attract others from elsewhere. And already a reasonable proportion of students studying there do come from outside the region. And that helps attract talent in, as well as serve the needs of the local population. I think if I can just focus in on the relationship between ourselves and the college and how that really helped become the heart of the programme as a whole. I think very early on, we really tried to develop a shared vision for what we were trying to achieve here. And, you know, there were no sort of silly questions or anything that couldn't be talked about. So we tried to foster open and honest conversations about what we were currently doing, what was currently going on, and what we could do differently. Our framework is that NTU in large part teaches all level 4 provision and above. So the college was doing some of that with other validating partners, but effectively transitioned that over to us. So we took on much of the existing HE provision at the college, but we didn't just sort of lift and shift. We looked at what was there, how suitable we thought it was initially, and structured that accordingly for the opening in 2020. But since then, we've continued a process of evolution of the curriculum, and also what courses we actually offer there. So we've already looked at dropping a couple because they're not really landing well enough. and not really serving the stakeholders, but equally we're opening up lots of new provision, which we're designing together between the college and the university, so that those pathways between the two are built in from the start. So one example would be around the green construction provision that we're doing. But a little more about what we've currently got started with. I think I'll just tease out the health provision, and especially nursing as one of our examples I think we're most proud of, because early conversations with the local health trusts showed a sort of degree of frustration really with what was happening in the hospitals and so on, with getting lots of placement students from providers much further away, and then the students do their placement and then they go back and they don't sort of stay in the area. So it ended up being a win-win really. By putting on nursing provision locally, we could attract in students who wanted to do things like nursing and related courses, but were unable to travel to do it. But also we could provide students for placements in the local hospital that then want and are staying in the area post-qualification. I think already we've shown that the demographics of the students we've attracted into the hub at Mansfield are really quite different from what we've got on our other campuses, and that's exactly what we wanted. And we've got that mix of heavily local, but also some coming in from elsewhere. And then I think just finally, next slide, please. A few reflections on kind of what I think the ingredients for success, and I think this just emphasises some of what I've heard in the earlier presentations. I would just remind ourselves we're only a short time into this. We only opened the doors of the hub a couple of years ago. The whole conversation only started 4 years ago. So we recognise that this is something that is a long-term commitment, and I think that was important to articulate and emphasise that from the start. This wasn't just a sort of fly-by-night thing to do. And I think we're learning lots, and there's still a lot more to learn about how to make this a successful partnership. But I think really key was developing trust, developing the relationships, the networks that we've got, and really sort of using the opportunity of the relationship between the college and the university to foster a much broader conversation about development in the area. That's enabled us to come up with our purpose, a sort of shared vision, the principles that drive this, because people come and go, don't they? So if we've got a set of principles there which we've all signed up to about what really sort of underpins what we're doing, that really helps for continuity and so on. But I won't deny that there was some, there are some really pivotal people that I don't think this would have got off the ground in the way that it has if we hadn't had those people in there. But hopefully we're building something that's really sustainable to hand on to others as well. And then finally, place. I think the importance of anchoring our activity in the place, how that developed, what that looked like, not just lifting and shifting from Nottingham city centre to Mansfield, but really looking to see what was best suited to the local area. And I think that's, place is important for our provision in Nottingham City, but it plays out in a different way to how it's playing out in Mansfield. And then several stakeholders and other externals have said to us, well, what was the secret ingredient? How did this work? And I think we're still learning that. But somebody suggested to me, and I think it's a good point, that actually in hindsight, our health provision was a proof of concept for us here, really. It involved all the stakeholders. We're saying, well, wouldn't it be great if we could do this? We tried it, we're doing it, and so far, so good. It's really sort of delivering what we hoped for. So I'll pause there. Again, hope I haven't overrun, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Sharon. I will stick to the idea of getting the questions once we've heard from Lewis. And I know that there's a sort of fabulous segue there, because the College of the Future report had 4, as I remember, Ps, of which I'm sure people, purpose and place were 3 of them. So if not, just before I hand over to Lewis, the only other one that I thought we might want to add, although it's not quite right, is permanence. And I know nothing is permanent, but I think what you've said and what you've revealed, and I think what all the case studies have shown, is that these are long-term endeavours, and we've got to give them the time and the commitment to see them through, because I think it's very easy to just dip in and out otherwise, isn't it, and look for short-term wins. Anyway, I will hand over to Lewis now to try and draw all that together.
Well, thanks so much, Samita, and what fantastic case studies. A huge amount of food for thought across all of those. And we really could go to town. I simply, my eyes brightened up similarly, Samita, with the alliteration,
Yeah.
and we could really go to town with that. I was just going to briefly talk and try and reflect on those case studies in the context of the report we did jointly, which you referenced earlier, Samita, and which I think Lizzie has popped in the chat. So I'd encourage people to give a read. But very briefly, I was going to talk through the why. Why are we talking about this? And picking up on points you made earlier and that have come up really through the presentations. The prompt, what actually drove, we can get the why, but what actually, we're amongst all the competing pressures that everyone has, what led this to actually happen? Then the how, and Sharon's 3 Ps there actually really map onto the recommendations for sector leaders that we set out in our Going Further Higher report. And then lastly, the how can governments help or hinder this agenda, and some brief reflections on that. So I'll just briefly pass through those. Firstly, the why, and Samita, you started with this, and I think it is really critical that we do that. Why are we doing this? Well, fundamentally, it's because it's at the core of our collective missions as colleges and universities. We do it better together, and has really come through the discussions, and Steve really drew this out. By doing this, we can actually reach more people, and we can have a bigger impact, and we can grow the cake, and that's really critical. And given the kind of labour market context that we're in, given the economic context that we're in, given the climate emergency that we face, given technological changes, if one thing is clear, it's that we need more people to be able to access education and skills much more throughout their lives. So there's a bigger cake that has to be if we're doing our jobs right, and that has to involve us working much more closely together, so we can have much more impact by working together. And that's really really sung through on all of the case studies there. But you can get the why, but then we've got all of our to-do lists and everything there. So across the 4 case studies, I heard a prompt, and the prompts kind of came in different directions. They sometimes came from a national government initiative. They sometimes came from a particular pot of funding. They sometimes came from a district council. They sometimes came from a city deal strategy. So there's got to be a prompt. And I suppose for everyone in the room, the fact that people are engaged in this is the prompt in itself. The prompt doesn't have to be led by policymakers, but someone has to say, right, we're going to do this, and we're going to get going. And that really came through on all the case studies. Then the how. In the report we published, we said that there were 3 central areas that are critical for college and university leaders to be thinking about, and those have really come through across all of the presentations. Firstly, geography, and Sharon really touched on this with one of the 3 Ps. Place is really critical. So there's a real need to think about what's the place that we operate in. The other side of that is, let's not get fixated on the perfect geography, because we could all drive ourselves kind of bonkers, kind of trying to come up, what's the perfect geography, how are we going to operate, and so on. We have to think about geography, but we have to be pragmatic here as well. And that's potentially a particularly English challenge at the moment, with kind of lots of debate about what economic geography is going to look like alongside England, and extremely asymmetric devolution. But everywhere we can get fixated about what the perfect geography is. We have to decide something and get going. So that I think really came through with the case studies, and being attentive to place, but not being kind of seeking to kind of find the perfect geography, because we'll never get there. Secondly, then scope, and I was trying to scribble around the scope that we've touched across the 4 case studies, and it's incredibly extensive. So I suppose the point here is, we can sometimes think about university-college relationships as purely about articulation or purely about pathways, but I caught here we're talking about employer engagement, innovation, business support, workforce development, curriculum, pathways, all of these things. And there's a whole host of other areas that we can think about. So I think thinking really broadly about what is it that we can work on collectively together is really important. And of course, we're here discussing the Civic University Network's work in particular, and looking at themes that were raised yesterday in the conference too. What can colleges and universities be doing together to look at sustainability in the climate emergency? What can colleges and universities do together to think about their collective role in public health? And we might add a whole host of other areas there. And on all of those, it's really clear to us that there's much more that can be achieved by working in a joined up way. So scope is really important, and again, not to try and do everything at once. You have to start somewhere, but scaling up and being really ambitious about where this can go is a second key area. And Sharon, picking back on your piece, that felt what you were really talking about in terms of purpose. So I think thinking about what is the purpose and where can we extend that and be really ambitious. And thirdly, how do you make these relationships sustainable? And that was, again, Sharon, people come and go. So I saw across all of these case studies a very different set of ways in which explicitly, implicitly, you're all talking about how do we come together? How do we build trust? How do we forge relationships at all levels of organisations? And it has to involve ownership at the top of institutions, but that has to be really embedded right across institutions. That's really critical. And then we have some questions that I think are really important for leaders to be asking. So do we need to look at governance? And of course, the IoT represents one approach there. The partnership between Nottingham Trent and Vision West Notts represents another approach. But Edinburgh College and the work you're doing there represents a different approach. So really reflecting on how are we going to make this sustainable? How do we not rely on a couple of relationships which will come and go? And how do we bed this in over the long term? So those are kind of three central reflections that we talk about that sector leaders really have to grapple with, and it does really speak to the people, purpose and place themes there. But I think we've done a lot through these sessions to think about the responsibilities of sector leaders, and I think there are responsibilities for everyone across the college and university sectors to own this agenda, despite the challenges, but because on the one hand, it's what we all want to be doing. It's how we can have greatest impact. And on the other, Samita, with your legal hat on, this is legally what we're in the business of doing. So I think there's a really important call to action and a responsibility for everyone there. But it's clear to us that governments, and it'll be clear to everyone, that governments can make this harder or easier. And Samita, you started at the beginning by noting that lots of these really good practices can happen despite rather than because of the system. We obviously have very, very different policy systems, education and skill systems across the four nations. But there are clearly ways in which all governments across the four nations can make this easier. And it's also clear that these are questions that are really being given a lot of attention by policymakers across the four nations. So in England, we've just had a skills bill, now Skills Act. We've got the rolling out of LSIPs and the strategic development funds. We've got a higher education bill coming probably this autumn. We've got discussions about lifelong loan entitlement. We've got lots of questions about how different parts of public services can come together within the levelling up agenda. In Wales, we've got the CETA legislation kind of really going through at pace, and big questions about what a tertiary system looks like in Wales. In Northern Ireland, there's a Skills 10x strategy and a really ambitious intent, I think, from sector leaders and from policymakers to look at a more joined up tertiary system. And in Scotland, we've got another review from Scottish Government, which significantly, I think, was going to be looking at a statement of intent for the college sector, and has shifted to a statement of intent for the tertiary sector. And I think that's significant. So clearly, these are questions that are being thought about a lot by policymakers. And very briefly, what do we think policymakers can do to make this easier? 5 things that are set out in our report. So firstly, we have to think of it as a system, and we have to say, as nations, what do we want from our system? So that strategic overarching system is really critical. It's very difficult to operate as a institutional leader if you're not clear about the system that you operate in. So that's number one. An overarching strategy is really critical, and that feels like something that governments are giving attention to. Secondly, it's really hard to collaborate when funding drives competition. So we have to look at how do we have sufficient, sustainable funding right across the system of the kind that can make it easier rather than harder to work together. Thirdly, what are the choices available to students in practice? So we have to look at the student financial support system, and that's an area where funding inequities between particularly lower level further education and higher education are kind of profoundly unjustifiable. And the more you get into that issue, the more it's a point of quite fundamental inequity in terms of who's able to access education with support from the state and who isn't. So that's something that needs to be addressed. You need to look at the wider system of funding, governance and accountability. So how do we bring together, what's the system within which colleges and universities operate? And Wales is really going for it in terms of an integrated post-16 system. Scotland's already got one funding body in the Scottish Funding Council, SDS aside, and those are going to be big questions for Northern Irish and UK government to grapple with too. So those are kind of key considerations where government can make it easier rather than harder in terms of coming together. I suppose what we've got today, though, is a sign that we clearly have to make the case for these national level policy changes, but actually we could wait forever for that change. And there's a huge amount that we've got the capacity as a college and university sector in each of the 4 nations to just crack on with. And that was really fantastic to hear from the case studies that we can just do that. So I'll stop there and thanks again. I'm looking forward to comments and questions from participants.
Thanks very much, Lewis. We have got some questions. So what I'm going to do is I will ask the question and then I will go to each of the panelists. And if you can just give as brief an answer as you can, but obviously do say whatever you want to say. So the first question, which I thought was really interesting, was what advice would you give to anyone else, either in your institution or at another institution, who wanted to develop a new partnership? So maybe we could start with David. What would your advice be if you had to give one piece of advice?
Yeah, I mean, thinking about before, I'll try and make this short, before I was involved with this project, that, you know, there's great forums that are available in Scotland, and it's a forum called, organisation called the College Development Network. And they have individual forums that you can join, and for different sectors, the conversations that happen at these forums on a monthly or quarterly duration are very useful, and it's networking. Right. So the College Development Network is excellent, and I can't speak highly. You know, the excellent forum, and the other thing from that. Then there is professional learning. So when I came into this post, I thought that would be the challenge. But if you can get people in the room, so if you take health and social care, and health and social care is delivered at each college, and if you get the leaders and everybody else that are delivering on these courses together, there'll be an outcome from it. So it's conversations is my bit of advice. Okay. Thank you, David.
Steve, what about you? What would be your advice?
I'm worried I'm going to steal some of Lewis's points here because he made some of these a moment ago. Time would be a key thing. So we all have great conversations with people that we think the same as, and they can lead to some great ideas. But the only ones that stick are the ones that have got some time associated with them. And that's not just 6 months, 12 months. It's longer than that.
Yeah, thank you. Sharon, how about you?
So I think I would pick, you know, if you're trying to get people to work with you and on board, you've got to have a good reason to sell that, because everybody's busy. So I think it's thinking about winning the hearts and minds. You know, why do you want to do this? Why will it be great? What will you get out of it, you know, personally, and you know what the institution will, and so on. So it's all about that kind of rationale and really selling that.
Yeah, no, fantastic. That's led me to another question, which I will ask in a moment. But Lewis.
I'd echo all of that. I think what can you start with? What are the areas where we can get cracking, and how can we scale up from that? On the one hand, make this sustainable, build over the long term. That's really important. And at the same time, not being afraid of saying this is difficult. It's difficult. I've not seen a context in which it's not difficult. And Steve talked a lot about a lot of the tensions that can exist between different parts of the system. That is absolutely everywhere. So not being afraid of saying, here's how it's quite difficult. Maybe here are some of the things we're just not going to get into. these are some of the things that we just we need to pay attention to, because it could become fraught here. So allowing for that, and I think not being afraid of the fact that this is a really difficult piece. Policy environments, national policy environments, can make it really difficult, but competition also exists between all sorts of providers. So I think allowing for that and kind of allowing that to be an open conversation.
And the question that led on to was actually what Sharon said, which was, what are people going to get out of the partnerships that you're building? And you used the crucial word there, personally. What will you personally get out of it? And so that's the question I wanted to ask you, because I think it's very easy sometimes to articulate it at a institutional level and say there are lots of great things we can do, but unless people feel personally excited, inspired, engaged in it, it's hard to get them to do what you need to do. So maybe going in reverse order, so I'm coming to you first, Lewis. What personally do you get out of the partnership work that you do?
Well, I suppose there's one, we've got another report out just this morning on the workforce challenge facing the education system. And I think that's particularly focused on schools. But exactly the same could be said about universities, and exactly the same could certainly be said about the college sector across the 4 nations in terms of the workforce challenges we face. That seems to me to be an area where there's such phenomenal scope for strengthening CPD offers for staff, developing recruitment pathways into different parts of the system, developing new progression routes. Really, that feels like something that could be explored. Investment in digital skills. It feels there's a huge amount that we don't do enough of at all in terms of a joint offer for the workforce, and thinking in a coordinated way about recruitment, retention, and development. And that feels like something that's both really right up there in terms of strategic priorities for education and skill systems across the 4 nations, but also something that immediately taps into an immediate benefit for staff in each of the institutions. So I think that would be an important area to explore.
Thank you. Sharon?
So what do I get personally? I think I'd like to go back to the cake idea again, because I love baking and I love cakes. But the idea that you can make a much bigger cake, which is what I really feel that we're getting out of the collaboration in Mansfield and Ashfield, is just amazing. And the opportunity to learn from people directly, rather than just reading sort of long reports or whatever, and then sparking new ideas from putting those ingredients together. It's fantastic.
Brilliant. Steve?
I came from industry before coming into education, and I could see firsthand that we weren't getting the skills we needed, particularly in digital and engineering. I'm a bit biased towards that. So personally, I want to fix digital and engineering curriculum. There's a path that's right for some, which is A-levels and degree. But for many, some of the best programmers I've taught, university wasn't right for them. They could do what they wanted and enjoy it more, taking majority were doing it. It wasn't an abnormal approach, but it wasn't the approach that was sold to them when they were younger. So fixing that is what does it for me.
Brilliant. And David?
Yeah, I would say it's been learning new things, professional development. After being involved for the education for 30 years, I thought I knew everything until I was involved with this project, and I was putting a professional program on for others. But actually, the professional every session I went along to, especially the curriculum groups, I actually had a takeaway, and it's been given this opportunity has been a great professional development for me.
Fantastic. Moving then back to some of the other questions that we've been asked. All of us have talked, I talked about it in my introduction, and I know all of you have talked about it in your case studies, about the leadership commitment. And I think also possibly the difference between individual leadership and then how do you make it a kind of embedded in the leadership of the institution more, more sort of robustly, the commitment to developing these kind of partnerships. So maybe if we, sorry to pick on you, Steve, but you've got there the potential, I suppose, for all sorts of different leaders to take slightly different views on how committed they are. And I know you did talk about how their approach to the IoT has changed. but maybe you could say a little bit more about, you know, how that commitment has manifested and just how important it's been in the development of the IoT.
Of course, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. It's been hard. There have been different agendas. There have been different, you know, I think a number of people went into the IoT thinking, you know, it's a nice way to get some new equipment, some new buildings, and we can promote our own courses on the back of that. What we've seen since that is a change of mindsets. People will openly say, well, yeah, we didn't think this would happen. So it's that commitment that we've seen. One of the universities, for example, the senior management very much into, we need to do more locally and regionally. The academic staff, not so much. But if you keep banging that drum, you know, 2 years later, the academic staff are now thinking, actually, there's something in this. It's not taking away from what we're doing, it's adding to it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's allowing, not allowing that initial, you know, sort of, as you said, quite palpable skepticism to sort of say, well, you know, we're going to give this a go anyway, and the benefits will then start to win the hearts and minds that, you know, Sharon was talking about, as much as what you can say to people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in terms of leadership, David, I think I was right. In your case study, the original idea or the original sort of genesis came from the government. It was the government that was funding this activity. But that's not enough on its own, is it? You've still got to then have that commitment at leadership level in the partners. So any observations or thoughts on how it's worked for you?
Yeah, I've got to say this was set up before I actually was in post, so I can't take any credit for this one. For each college, there's a vice principal. They're active, so we have monthly meetings, actions are agreed, and you come out of that meeting feeling that it's been a worthwhile hour and a half. Yeah. And at that level, that they're senior managers and they can make these decisions. And support the you know, mechanism that's there has been great. So the monthly meetings with vice principals at that level who are active have been very good with leadership.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because I think people are often in slightly mixed minds about meetings. You know, there's a sort of feeling that we have too many of them, but they're an amazing way of focusing the mind on, have you actually done what you promised to do at the last meeting, and kind of keeping things going. So yeah,
and also, you know, to talk about challenges, then you could take the challenges to that meeting. I'm not saying it's always going to be solved, but at least there is a forum there, and it's focused, and the meetings then connect to other meetings. You know, so they're very beneficial.
Yeah, thank you. And Lewis, I mean, from a sort of more system level, is there more that we should be doing to help leaders, you know, build those commitments and maintain them?
I suppose when we open up these conversations, I'm yet to meet a leader who doesn't fundamentally believe this is the right thing to do. I mean, that's absolutely certain. I'm yet to meet a leader who isn't committed first and foremost to all of this agenda. And yet I see lots of leaders, maybe all leaders, who face, when you look at the pressures on you, the particular drivers, they do drive a focus on institutional over systems goods, and that is a fundamental problem. Yeah. What do we reward? What do you get an OBE? What are the kind of reward mechanisms? It's for running a great institution, for having a good Ofsted, for going up the league tables. So we've got all of the incentive structures saying focus on institutional goods, and then you've got the other part of I think every leader's head saying, yeah, but I want to do something broader for the wider community. And I think that's a tension, and that's a tension that I think policymakers do have to grapple with. And I think that's happily, I think something that policymakers really are grappling with. So I've kind of detailed a bunch of the reforms at the moment, but I think regionalisation in Scotland's been thinking about this. I think the CETA legislation in Wales is absolutely thinking about this. We've got IoTs and LTIPs in England really grappling with this. So I see a massive opportunity here. Also hear all of the challenges there. So I see English college leaders wanting to dive into how making local skills improvement plans work, and then every other incentive structure saying, but think about what about your enrolment next year? Forget everything else. So I think there's a real tension there. And again, I think so policymakers can help with reforms, looking at incentive structures. As sector leaders who are doing it, I think we really just have to, and that's I suppose what we've done today, shining a light on people who are stepping in and doing things and amplifying the best of what happens feels really critical. Finding reward mechanisms, formal and informal, for because I think that is important. And then sharing best practices, sharing both the successes and I think helpfully the scars, what was really tough, and I think being open about that it really helps.
Yeah, I want to come back to the scars in a minute, because that was going to be the final question. But perhaps I shouldn't end on such a gloomy note, but I will. Sharon, how about you in terms of leadership commitments? How important has it been to what you've been doing in Mansfield, and also how do you make it grow and endure?
Yeah, so I think, it's really critical, as everybody said, and I won't, repeat what earlier points, but perhaps just to add that I think it's something you have to keep looking at and revisiting. So, I'll just give you one example. We worked really hard on a lot of external engagement over the last sort of year, I would say, especially, and really broadening out and strengthening those external stakeholder relationships. And perhaps to a certain extent neglected what we were doing internally. And then, you start getting people asking questions, well, why are we doing this when we've got so much else on? So, yeah, giving a bit more attention back to that at the moment, thinking about it. But so it's constantly keeping it under review so that people don't lose sight of it for too long, but recognising that everybody's got lots of different priorities on their plate, different sizes.
Absolutely. Thank you. So the final question then for all of you is, what do you think is the biggest challenge? So you've only got one, and you might all give us the same one, but you might all give us different ones. The biggest challenge to building successful partnerships between universities and colleges. And I'm going to pick. Who am I going to pick first? I'll go for Steve. Steve, you look like a person with an answer to this question.
Well, there's plenty. I think my problem is trying to pick one of them. The one that's quite apparent at the moment, even 4 years in, is the commercialization and the patch mentality. So having people say they will work in collaboration, but when it comes down to, well, hang on, that encroaches on my patch, I thought we were talking about another area there. And I think it's the tensions that Lewis alluded to, being focused on what you've got to deliver in your institution in that particular area rarely gels nicely with promoting partnerships.
Great. Okay. And David?
I would say, and I mentioned in the presentation, is staff capacity. And it's become an issue because staff have come along with ideas and not be able to put them into action quickly. You sometimes lose people, but there is a solution there. So it would be staff capacity is still the biggest challenge.
Thank you. Sharon?
So I think I'll give a slightly different one. I think, we've talked here about sort of long-term and commitment and so forth, and then trying to juggle that with government short-termism and very short times to submit funding bids and so on. We could do so much more with a bit more of an organised government approach in terms of how it wants us to collaborate and funding opportunities to deliver those sort of broader benefits, I think.
Thank you, Sharon. And finally, Lewis?
I was going to say funding, and I think that is a major issue, but I'd actually echo what Sharon says. I think even more than funding, what institution leaders need to know is that we're in it for the long term. And so what do we need from policymakers? We need that long-term direction of travel, so that whether it's an LSIP or an IoT or whatever it is, all partners within it can have confidence that this is worth investing in, worth doing the hard graft, and that it will persist over. So I think that's what's needed. And to try and end it on a happy note there then, Samita, certainly I hear policymakers across the four nations all saying that they are in it for the long term and that this is a fundamental long-term objective. And I think they're saying that partly because of work that lots of organisations have been doing to make this case, and I think people should be commended for that. But I think they're also saying it because returning to the purpose here, I think policymakers absolutely understand that if we don't have a very serious focus on education and skills and lifelong learning, we won't meet any of the major challenges that we face. So I think they get it. I think they're wanting that, and I think the collective task for all of us is to hold people to it and to get cracking.
Thank you, Lewis. And that is a very positive way to end it. So I'm not going to add my sort of normal legal gloomy notes to these things. I will go with that. I think it's right. Everybody knows this is important and everybody wants to foster the environment in which we can do it. So I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. I hope you found that as enjoyable and stimulating a conversation as I have. This is a week-long series of events for the Civic University Network. So, please do think about any further events you'd like to attend. There are still some spaces available. And I hope you'll now see on your screen the short feedback poll that I mentioned at the beginning. Please do answer that. And thank you very much for your time today. Goodbye.